All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a really powerful scientific concept from the FDA that honestly makes our medicine safer and helps bring new innovations to us a lot faster. It's all about building what you might call a predictive bridge between a lab test and the human body.
So let's just dive right in by starting with its super common but really critical problem that basically every drug manufacturer has to deal with.
I mean, think about it. A company might tweak an inactive ingredient. Maybe they switch where they make the drug, or they just make a much bigger batch. Every single time, they're staring down this massive challenge. How do you prove the pill is still just as safe and effective without having to run brand new, expensive, and super time-consuming human trials for every little change?
You know, the old way of doing things was basically going back to square one with new clinical studies. But the real goal, the big idea the FDA put forward, is to move away from that. The idea is to shift to a smarter, more predictive, science-based model. What we really want is a lab test that can act as a totally reliable stand-in for human trial.
Okay, so to really get how this works, we need to connect two very different worlds: the super-controlled environment of a science lab and, well, the incredibly complex reality of the human body.
So on one hand, you've got in vitro testing, which literally means in glass. This is what happens in the lab when scientists measure how a pill dissolves in a beaker. But on the other hand, you've got in vivo, or within the living, which is what actually happens when you swallow that pill. The whole game, really, is finding a rock-solid mathematical link between the two.
And that link? It has a name: In Vitro/In Vivo Correlation, or IVIVC for short. Now, this isn't just some vague comparison. The FDA defines it very clearly as a predictive mathematical model. It is the scientific bridge that lets what we see in a simple lab test accurately predict what's going to happen inside a person.
So if this IVIVC is our bridge, how do scientists actually build it? Well, it's a very, very deliberate process.
It all starts by intentionally creating different versions of the same drug. Think of it like a slow-release version, a medium-release, and a fast-release one. First, they test each one in the lab to see how they dissolve. Then, they give them to actual human volunteers to see how they're absorbed in the body. The final step is to find a single mathematical model that connects the lab results to the human results across all three speeds. If they can find a model that works for all of them, then congratulations, they've built their predictive bridge. Now, here's a really key point. Not all of these predictive bridges are created equal. The FDA actually has a system to classify them, because as you can imagine, some correlations are way more powerful than others. In their official guidance from 1997, they laid out this whole classification system. The two you really need to know about are Level A, which is the absolute gold standard, and Level C, which is more like a quick spot check. Okay, so Level A, this is the holy grail. It creates a direct, point-for-point relationship between the entire lab test and the drug's entire journey in the body. It's kind of like getting a super detailed hour-by-hour weather forecast for the whole day. It tells you the full story. A Level C correlation, though, that's just a snapshot. It might link one single data point, say how much dissolves after 4 hours, to one single outcome, like the peak drug level. It's like a weather report that only predicts the high temperature at noon. Useful for sure, but it doesn't give you the whole picture. And look, the FDA is super clear about which one they prefer. As you can see right here in their guidance, they say a Level A correlation is the most informative and the one they recommend, simply because its predictive power is just so high. It gives everyone the most confidence. So why? Why go through all this trouble, especially to build one of these top-tier Level A bridges? Well, because the payoff is enormous. And this is the whole point of the entire process. It all comes down to something called a biowaiver. This is the official green light from regulators to waive the requirement for a new human study. That validated, predictive Level A model is so trusted that the lab test can now officially stand in for human testing. And boom, that right there solves the exact problem we talked about at the very beginning.
But, okay, how good does this prediction have to be? I mean, for regulators to trust a lab test instead of a human trial, there must be a pretty high bar, right? Well, the FDA sets a very clear, measurable standard.
And that magic number is 10%. To get the green light, the model has to be ridiculously accurate. The average error, so the difference between what the model predicts and what actually happens in people, has to be 10% or less. And that's for the really important stuff, like the peak drug concentration in the blood and the total amount of drug you're exposed to. So yeah, it has to be remarkably precise. And you know what's cool? The power of this idea goes way beyond just getting biowaivers. Once you have this deep understanding, companies can set much smarter quality control limits. It also makes it way easier to approve things like new, lower-dose versions of an existing medicine. At the end of the day, it just makes the whole system of making and managing our medicines smarter, faster, and way more driven by science.
So as you can see, IVIVC is so much more than just some clunky regulatory acronym. It's a foundational piece of predictive science that helps make sure the medicines we all rely on are consistent and safe, and that they can be improved without a bunch of unnecessary costs and delays. And it leaves you with a really fascinating question, right? As this predictive science gets even better, what's the next part of human drug testing that a powerful model like this could one day make obsolete?